and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam.
This is a fantastic market because of the strength of the population.
You have to Vietnamize your content here.
I would tell them to come on board, tell them what they like, or give them what they like.
Vietnam is a very, very dynamic and exciting market.
Greetings to you all, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the show. My name is Phi Nguyen, and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. In December 2005, investment bank Goldman Sachs named Vietnam as one of the next 11 economies expected to be the next BRICS of the 21st century. And in a research report in April 2008, the bank called Vietnam the next Asian tiger in the making. The Southeast Asian country was also included among the Economic Intelligence Unit CIVET, which stands for Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa, considered as emerging markets to watch over the next 10 years. How much of this is the truth? Today, I'm bringing you closer to Vietnam through the eyes of an expert in trade and investment development, who will hopefully give you a perspective on how far the next Asian tiger has been in the making. Let us welcome Mr. Tony Burchill, Senior Trade Commissioner of Austrade in Vietnam. Good day to you, Tony, and thank you very much for being on Inside Vietnam with us today.
Thanks, Phi. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I understand that Austrade is a government agency of Australia, and as such, you have been promoting trade and investment between Australia and Vietnam. Is that right?
Absolutely, but it's an unusual government agency in that we deal a lot with the private sector naturally, and we charge fees.
Just to give us a perspective on the importance of the agency in promoting trade and investment in Vietnam, what sort of total value in trade and investment are you talking about?
Well, there's $6 billion in two-way trade between Australia and Vietnam, and that includes items such as crude oil from Vietnam and an array of services from Australia. So it's significant. Yeah.
It's significant.
Yeah.
And have you seen the growth from this particular value in the last few years as well?
Sure, it's been growing quite strongly, about 10% per annum, including in more difficult times, and it's also coming off a very diversified base, which is encouraging. Yeah.
Is that very much in line with the growth from top investing countries into Vietnam, such as Korea, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore?
It's a good question. I think people need to understand that these countries like Taiwan, South Korea, increasingly Singapore, Malaysia and China are big investors in Vietnam. They invest into the industrial base. Australia can invest into the mining sector when that opens up and be a big investor. But at the moment we're an intermediary. We're helping with those investments. Our companies are great engineering companies, great mining companies, great software companies and great educationalists. That's where we add value to the relationship. Okay,
I've read your agency business report. And you mentioned that Vietnam's economy is on a rebound. Now, I like that word, rebound. Credited to the recovery of world trade, financial markets, improved investment environment in Vietnam, and growing domestic consumption. Now, let's talk about the improved investment environment in Vietnam. Based on what foundation do you suggest that there are improvements in this particular?
Yeah, look. It's a good question, but it's a complex area because of a number of variables that abound. But what people need to realise is Vietnam's modern economy has been built on a particular model based on industrial manufacturing. That's where the Taiwanese factories, the South Korean factories are coming, invested, particularly around the south, around Ho Chi Minh. And while the economy has been growing about 8–9% over 20 years, in the industrial manufacturing growth being about 20 to 25%. So that model's proven quite resilient. And what happened during the global financial crisis is that areas such as textiles and shoes actually didn't collapse. They actually remained quite strong because they're in international value chains, and the Vietnam economy and the Vietnamese people are very resilient and very dynamic. So that's been the saving grace for Vietnam over the last 2–3 years.
But though for those sectors particularly, you're talking about textile, manufacturing, there has been a lot of reduction in terms of volume in the last few years, right?
It depends on the sector, of course. I mean, some companies closed, but if you actually look at the figures with textiles, The Economist, for example, was predicting a drop of 30 to 40%, but the actual drop tended to be around 5%. So it actually proved quite resilient. Yeah.
Let's just touch base on Vietnam in regional context. And you understand that Vietnam is in a testing phase of market economy right now.
Sure.
And while other markets in the regions are very much established. So is it the potentiality of the future of Vietnam that Austrade is promoting and not actually the present?
Sure. Well, it's really both. But definitely there's a bet on the upside. And as you know, I'm a great believer in the benefits of Vietnam as a geophysical bridge between Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. So if you're looking at Vietnam as a future bet, then you have to say, well, it's this young population, it's coming off a low base, it's a competitor and collaborator with China. So it's an important country in a very important neighbourhood.
Let's talk about the growing domestic consumption in Vietnam. And I know that you know a lot about this. From the research agencies, I've got figures to show that there is an emerging middle class in Vietnam. And this particular emerging middle class, because of their disposable income, is now on a spending mode instead of a saving mode, like their parents. And that's why we've got a growing domestic consumption in Vietnam at the moment. Is that what you're seeing?
Vietnam, it's a Confucian-based culture, so savings will remain important, but it's also a very young society, a very consumerist society, particularly in the south. So you're seeing a lot of expenditure on branded goods, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
But I've seen a lot of new brands, new international brands entering the market. And I was thinking supplies right now is being driven by foreign companies in Vietnam to the domestic market. And the private and public sectors or companies in Vietnam are actually relying more on export at the moment, leaving the domestic opportunities to the foreign companies. Is that the case?
I think that's a really good point, and that's certainly part of the story. But it gets back to the economic history. So we had this industrial manufacturing model. It's an export model. It's very similar to what China has achieved. Now the question for Vietnam is to go beyond that into more advanced manufacturers, into more fast-moving consumer goods, into more service-type companies. And I'm a great optimist about the people here and the entrepreneurs here, such as yourself, and I think those people will fill those gaps. Yeah.
What sort of timeline do you think there would be for Vietnam, though, to move from industrial or manufacturing into consumer sort of sector?
I'm a former business journalist, as you know, Fee, so I always get put on the spot about timelines. Look, it's happening more quickly than what people realise.
Let's get back to this economic rebound that I really like. This rebound, as seen in various economic reports, is believed to have been driven by increases in income, remittances, and reduction in inflation. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't actually. Remittances and incomes are symptoms of the rebound. Okay, so remittances in Vietnam are about 4% of GNP. They remain pretty constant. What created the rebound was the resilience of its industrial manufacturing and low-cost base, and its dynamicism based on the entrepreneurs and local business people to drive the economy forward. The income is simply, as I say, a byproduct of the growth.
Let's go back to the regional context, because I like to put Vietnam in regional context.
Sure, so do I.
And Vietnam is seen as a very attractive destination in Southeast Asia. Let's put Vietnam in terms of APAC, Asia-Pacific regional context.
Okay.
How does Austrade rank Vietnam as a destination in comparison to other markets in the region?
Well, we rank it very highly. I think in terms of where it ranks in the region, and I'm a person who's worked in Indonesia, Taiwan, and also India. So I have a reasonable perspective in that regard, is that its potential is huge. It's got a very homogeneous population, a great geophysical location. So there's a lot of things in its favour. But at the end of the day, individual investors will invest in sectors, not markets. So if you're a mining house, you're not going to invest in Vietnam. You'll probably invest in Indonesia because they've got a more open mining law. If you're investing into industrial premises, depending on the value chain, it could be automotive, it could be something else, infrastructure, then Vietnam is probably looking at pretty good.
I'm pretty sure when your clients come to you asking for opportunities in different markets in the region for investment opportunities, you basically advise them of the risks that each country would have in terms of investment. What would you say to your client if they are to invest into Vietnam?
You're absolutely right. You have to give a very honest account about the risk profile of the market. The risks in Vietnam are, again, depending on the sector, is very important. But the regulatory environment, they need to understand that. They need to understand whether there's a state-owned enterprise in that area, because that state-owned enterprise will probably dominate the area. So what are they doing? Are they a partner or a supplier to the SOE? That's very important for them to understand. They need to understand who they're partnering with. Is there somebody reputable, somebody that we know and has a long history? And they need to understand about imports, human imports, industrial imports and so forth. They need to understand about transparency and corruption in the market as well.
Tony, you mentioned to me once that Vietnam's regional position is to serve as a bridge between China and the ASEAN. Now, have you actually seen any of your clients strategically position Vietnam in such a way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the bridge between China and ASEAN, but between Northeast Asia, including South Korea and Japan and Taiwan and other players. But it's an important advantage Vietnam has. In terms of Australian firms doing well in this area, it's very important to look at our engineering and infrastructure firms. Companies like Minehart Vietnam, Leighton's, Oricon, GHD, SMEC, SKM, they all have substantial presence here, and they also have substantial presence in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. So it's part of their conveyor belt of service, if you like.
Do you think Vietnam will be very much like Singapore in the next 10 years or 20 years, being the hub of the region?
That's a tough question. Singapore's got a large head start, and you've got to remember, Singapore's what, 5 million people, Vietnam's 88 million people. It's a totally different equation. What Singapore has done has been phenomenal, but I think Singapore provides examples of where Vietnam needs to go.
I've also heard a lot about Vietnam thinking of being the financial hub of the region. What do you think about that?
I think that's a tall order at the moment. I think there's many things the State Bank of Vietnam has to do. I think they have to consolidate their banking sector. I think they have to bring in more transparent laws and regulations. And the stock market has to become much broader. The market is way too narrow. And the privatisation or equitisation program of the state-owned enterprises needs to accelerate.
Would you say that the rate of privatization of SOEs in Vietnam is lower than some of the markets in the region?
Yes. I mean, China's done a pretty good job in that area. And I spent 3 years in India, and India had a very similar landscape. But you'll see in India it's improving now as well. Of course, they're slowly allowing more competition as well. I think it's when the state-owned enterprises understand that it's to their own benefit for the economy to liberalise that they'll start letting go a bit.